Welcome to the Business of Story, where we connect you with the leading minds in the art of business storytelling. Learn from best-selling authors, Hollywood screenwriters, makers, content marketers, and brand raconteurs on how to craft and tell compelling stories that sell. The Business of Story is brought to you by Emma, which provides innovative email marketing tools and services that drive brilliant results. And by Convince and Convert, digital marketing advisors and counselors to leading brands and organizations worldwide. Convince and Convert helps you gain and keep your customers online. Here's your host, Park Howell.
Hello, welcome to Business of Story. Park Howell here, and I'm just really happy to have you along for this show. But let's start with a question for you. So what do you do when you put your heart and soul into a communications project or a creative campaign, and you're having a lot of success with it until the world changes before your very eyes, practically overnight? Well, on today's show, we have a story artist who is in the throes of this very journey right now. Joel Bach is the creator and executive producer of Nat Geo's Years of Living Dangerously, a program all about the impacts of climate change. The series does not debate climate change. In fact, despite what our current administration may deny, the science on the issue is pretty settled. Joel and his team investigate how bad things will get because of climate change, how soon that might happen, and what we can do to stop it. And guess what? They are brilliant storytellers in this process. Every episode of Years of Living Dangerously features a Hollywood celebrity, from, say, Jack Black learning about the impacts of sea level rise in Miami, to David Letterman investigating India's radical move to renewable solar energy, to Arnold Schwarzenegger on the front lines of fighting wildfires that don't happen just seasonally anymore. They happen year-round because of climate change. So on today's show, Joel talks about how to use celebrities in storytelling to entertain and educate while not positioning them as the experts. He'll also share with us the most priceless advice he ever received, which came from Don Hewitt, the creator of 60 Minutes. Joel was a writer, co-producer for the show for 7 years, and Don gave him this one piece of advice that he's never forgotten, and in fact, it still influences his storytelling today. And we'll talk about the important story elements of character, stakes, uncertain outcomes, and the theme or point of your story. So let's jump into today's show with Emmy award-winning storyteller Joel Bach. Hey Joel, welcome to Business of Story. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Park. It's great to be here as well.
Now, I've been excited for this interview because you cover a couple of primary areas in my life and in my listeners' lives. Business of Story has been around now for a year and a half, and it's all about bringing story artists like yourself onto the scene here with us so that our business leaders and communicators can learn from a producer, executive producer like you, the power of story and how they can use it in their own world. But as you know, I also teach at Arizona State University in the Executive Masters of Sustainability Leadership. So I'm working with business leaders and executives from around the world to help them fine-tune their sustainable storytelling so that they can enact initiatives within their organizations. And I'm talking large organizations like Bayer Pharmaceutical, Cummins Diesel, American Express, and the like, as well as down to small firms, people that are just trying to have an impact out there. You are doing that. You are at the heart of media, Nat Geo, and your amazing show, Years of Living Dangerously. So welcome, and can you give us a little bit of backstory? How do you find yourself where you are today as a producer of sustainable storytelling, in the mass media?
Okay, well, I'll try to, I could go way back in time, but I'll just go back a few years. I was working with my pal David Gelber at 60 Minutes starting in 2004. And, we did lots of different stories for 60 Minutes. And over time, it became clear to me that climate change was a story that we ought to look into. So we started to do stories on climate. And the first story we did was on these wildland firefighters out west who were battling these big fires because of climate change. So we spent a lot of time with these guys, and They didn't all believe in climate change, but they were living through it.
Even though they're fighting the fires of it, huh?
Yeah, and so some of them may have even been climate deniers, and yet they would say it's hard to deny it when it's coming to your front door, and we see it every single day. And so these guys were quickly becoming converts and understanding how real a deal this is. And then we did another story after that on the idea of clean coal, and this kind of concept that had been presented to Americans that coal is actually clean, which we basically reported is was not really true at all.
I was wondering if you did air quotes when you said clean coal right there.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh. And then David and I started to just fantasize about just only doing climate change stories for 60 Minutes, but that's not the kind of shop that 60 is. You don't get to just do only one thing. 1 week you're doing a story on a knuckleball pitcher. The next week you're doing a story on Iraq, and you don't really have beats there. So we were pitching a lot of climate change stories, but they really wanted us to keep doing all sorts of different stories. So David and I would meet for lunch at this Greek joint down the street from the office at 60 and talk about how there was a need for some big follow-up to Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth, that there hadn't really been anything, big since then. And that film piqued a lot of interest among, millions of people on the issue of climate change and brought it to them. And then in the ensuing years, interest in climate change started to dwindle and die. And we felt like there ought to be something, really big to get it back onto the national radar. So we thought of doing a film. And then, we wanted to use the kind of 60 Minutes model of having correspondents go out into the world to learn about things and come back come back reporting on what they learned. But we wanted to use celebrities. We just felt like, these are people who are comfortable on camera, obviously, who have massive appeal, who are great to watch, and who are smart, and who many of whom care about this issue. The problem is we didn't know any celebrities, so that was a problem. But a friend of mine from college, my friend Abby Weintraub, her uncle was Jerry Weintraub. Jerry passed away a couple years ago, but Jerry was this iconic figure in Hollywood. He was the chairman of United Artists, and he was the producer of a lot of big movies, the Ocean's 11 movies, and Oh God, and Diner, and Nashville, and The Karate Kid. And he's just this iconic guy, and was really plugged into all the Ocean's 11 crowd was like the kind of people we were thinking of for the show. Mm-hmm. So we this is a long story. I won't do the whole thing, but we went out to see Jerry in Palm Springs, and he said, guys, why are you trying to make a movie? No one's gonna go see a movie about climate change, and you guys are TV producers, so stick to your knitting and make a TV series. So it was. Suddenly, this film turned into a series, upon Jerry's request, and he said, "I'll help you guys put this together, but stick to your knitting, and and let's try to go even bigger." So Jerry signed on as an executive producer, and a short while later, we were able to get a meeting with James Cameron, who told us that he was thinking of doing something similar, or had been thinking about doing a similar kind of project, but just didn't have the time to devote all of his energies to it. And so he signed on as an EP, and then next thing you knew, we had Arnold Schwarzenegger involved as well. So we suddenly had these three big Hollywood heavyweights involved in the production, and that allowed us to bring on the cast and bring on to find money for financing and get a deal with Showtime for season 1.
So you kicked it off in season 1, and my wife and I, by the way, have been binge watching it, getting caught up. I'd heard of the show, but finally don't watch a lot of TV, so finally got around to really going through it. And I'll say, to me, it's kind of this Vice meets, as you say, Ocean's 11. You have these celebs on there, and we were watching the other night, and my wife Michelle, who's not quite as steeped in all of this as I am, because of course I live it day in and day out, she was laying on the couch, and I think at one point she even was like, "Holy shit, I can't believe this is what's really going on. So I got a chance to kind of dissect from her, what was it about the programming that was really connecting with her? Was it the celebs, or was it, the material? And she goes, well, I think the celebs invite me in, they draw me into it, but then as you relate the stories of what's truly happening with climate change to our planet, that was her holy shit moment, basically. So how do you use that? Can you kind of give our listeners an insight into the story artistry that went into creating this somewhat unusual meld of sort of that Vice documentary coupled with Hollywood?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing we really did not want to do is position our cast members as experts, because they're not, right? I mean, Don Cheadle cares about climate change, but he's not an expert. He's not a scientist. Harrison Ford knows a lot about the environment, but he's not a climate scientist. Matt Damon, all of our and Arnold Schwarzenegger, they all care, but they're not necessarily experts.
Well, and you have David Letterman running around India, which I thought was fascinating, because it was this juxtaposition that really got my head going. Like, what is Letterman doing in India talking about power and energy?
Yeah, and so Letterman's an even better example. Here's a guy who, everyone knows who he is. And I would see that he would have climate scientists on his show every once in a while. So kind of a little alarm bell went off in my head. And I thought, maybe, Letterman really, this is something he really cares about. Because, it's hard to know what someone cares about until you ask them. But the point I was trying to make is that our cast members go out into the field essentially knowing nothing. I mean, they know what they know about what's happening in the world. And they then learn along the way. They talk to people, they learn things, and there's kind of holy shit moments all along the way as they either see climate change as it's taking place, or as they talk to people, or as they investigate why nothing's being done. And they're just basically asking the kind of questions that you or I or any average American would ask if presented with a certain situation or in a certain environment, or we're sitting across from a certain person. And it's not there. So this is not meant to be 60 Minutes. It's not meant to be even Vice. It's not meant to be a series of interviews so much as it is conversations and a journey. So David Letterman goes to India. He'd never been to India. He didn't know anything about solar in India or climate change in India. And by the end of the story, he now knows something about what's going on there. So I think what's cool is that it has a kind of, it's genuine. There's, it's a real journey for these people. And, that's why they enjoy doing it.
Well, I think something that you do too that is nice in the program is it's one thing to be, having Letterman running around India. A lot of us who've never been to India still have a hard time connecting with that because it's so remote. But then you do a good job because you come back and you cover what happened in Vegas in Nevada. The governor there pretty much just pissing all over solar, and Sunrun, which was doing great work up there as a solar company, a residential rooftop solar company, basically having to pack up and move out. And one of our students from our executive master's program at ASU was a sales guy for Sunrun for a couple of years.
Oh,
wow. And he felt the pain too. Now he's out on his own doing his own thing, but he tells those same horror stories. But what is nice about, I think, what you do in Years of Living Dangerously is you connect it back to our world, because a lot of times, we can't connect with India or rainforest loss and that sort of thing. It's so remote. We feel helpless in that case until you come back and you connect it to the bureaucrats in our backyards that seem to be so short-sighted that they do what they did in Nevada and basically just killed solar.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of money to be had in the energy business. And those who have been, burning fossil fuels as a way to generate energy, and that's, I understand that that's what we've done for many decades now, and it's how we've built up our country, and how a lot of countries have built up their economies. There's an interest among a lot of these powerful utility companies to maintain that because it's so profitable. It's the biggest industry out there. So you have a residential rooftop solar company come along, and that's just they're trying to take your business away from you. So I understand the desire to kind of push back against these companies. But the problem is that we now have this new issue facing us, which is climate change, and we need to actually switch to these new forms of energy. And so you see the kind of tactics used. I mean, it's one thing for two businesses to go kind of to compete with each other for market share. It's another to see the kind of dirty tactics used to make sure that the newcomer doesn't have a shot.
Well, and both sides use story, and the dinosaurs, burning dinosaurs, to continue to create our energy are pretty good at storytelling themselves. And for an uninformed public, and even for an informed public, you can see how they get confused when these issues come up. There's such a cacophony of information out there about climate change and what's happening, and I think it's gotten even worse. And so I'm kind of curious how you, and if it'll be approached in your shows, or if it even takes you looking at your shows a little bit different. Now we've got the Trump administration in, complete climate deniers, of course, and in addition to very divisive and disruptive on everything from immigration to women's issues to fake news that they generate. So you are now, as a climate sustainable storyteller, you even have more competition of trying to get this message across, because you're dealing with all those other folks out there too that are marching and screaming and hollering about immigration, women's issues, and this sort of thing. How can you possibly cut through the cacophony, and what advice can you give to our listeners when we are all dealing with this noise in our markets, be they social causes or just brand stories? How do you cut through the noise and really connect with people and be heard?
That's an excellent question, and it's something that we've been discussing a lot lately. And it's a fear of ours that there will be so many other stories and so many other issues being discussed in the news media and among the public that climate change will fall through the cracks. It's a huge fear of ours, and how we break through is something we're working on right now. I think one way that we do that is. Season 1 came out in 2014, and then season 2 came out last year, the end of last year. We don't want to have another 2 years go by before we have a third season. I mean, we're planning to do a third season, but in the interim, what we're going to do is we're going to make a whole lot of noise on social media. We're going to focus our efforts right now on short-form storytelling on climate change. So taking the stories that we've done in season 1 and 2 and repurposing them into short-form videos that we can blast out onto the web. So we now have a Facebook following that is second in size only to Greenpeace. So Greenpeace has a big following. Then there's us, and then there's a lot of other environmental groups.
That's awesome.
So we have a pretty big megaphone on Facebook, and we are going to, as I said, beat the drum every day on this issue. Whether we can break through the noise through all the chatter is going to be it remains to be seen. But what we did just this week is we rolled out something called Daily Actions on Facebook, and it's something that people can do every single day to address climate change. So, I think that's one of the reasons why climate change is not the highest priority for so many people. It's because they feel defeated by it, and they feel they feel stuck, and they don't know what to do. And so we're communicating to people that there are concrete things you can do. Both as individuals, or as if you run a company, or if you're in any way, a political leader, there are things you can do. So I think that sense of hope is important. We do see, the good news is, in the last 4 years, climate change has become more of a pressing concern for independents and for Democrats. So it's really risen on their priority list. For Republicans, it's basically stayed flat. It hasn't moved up. We're obviously not solely responsible for that. We've played a little role, though, and so we feel like if we keep banging the drum on this issue, we can continue to make this a higher priority. because eventually it'll be a number one priority for everybody. But obviously by then it's too late.
Well, when they have water lapping at their front door, like you see in the show down in Miami, even on a calm day where the tides are coming in and they're coming up through the sewer systems. Pretty shocking when you look at what's happening with that. I wanted to ask you too about going back to this idea of using celebrities. I was reading an article. You guys talked about really the three main things you were trying to achieve with your storytelling is be entertaining. So you do pull people in, and it's kind of a discovery show. You're not taking a stance saying, is it real or not? You're just simply showing what's happening currently. So be entertaining, be informative, which you do, and then be accurate. So with your celebs in there, you are entertaining. Do you have any fear at all, especially with the Trump administration, that they come out and they could, point to your show and say, oh, look, it's just some more limousine liberals out there trying to tell their story, and they're just, they're fabricating it? Because these climate deniers and the folks that just want to ignore science, they will point at the storyteller and basically say, oh, they're just telling you a story. Don't believe it. It's not really true. Has that impacted how you might pursue the show in the future at all, or is that a concern at all?
It's that too is a good question, and it's something that the New York Times is facing right now, and a lot of media outlets are facing. Mm-hmm. Trump is running around saying that the New York Times is a web of lies and is deceiving the public. Just as a journalist, it's hard to know what to do with that, because the Times has rigorous fact checking, and we have rigorous fact checking. So everything that we do goes through, I'd say, 4 rounds of fact checking at the very least. And so we're incredibly careful with our facts. If Trump starts to come after us and say, here's Hollywood again in another form, and what does Matt Damon know, or what does David Letterman know about science? Hopefully the storytelling will hold up. I mean, we haven't been criticized yet in terms of getting anything wrong, and I think that's because we've been really just very careful in our fact checking and our reporting. So I don't know what we'll do if and when that happens. But
yeah, he's so unorthodox. And from a communicator standpoint, when I look at it, I really wonder with the journalists and folks like yourself is how it's not even combat it as much as how do you get people to realize the untruths that are being thrown out there, and that, the media does have to do its fact checking. I mean, if the media loses its accuracy, it loses everything. So it's really an odd situation to be in, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, we apply the same fact-checking requirements. We apply the same fact-checking requirements on our show that we did at 60 Minutes, and I think we're even more vigorous because we don't have CBS News behind us. We're our own entity, and so we're rigorous, incredibly rigorous. I think maybe one thing that can combat this a little bit is that there are a number of Republicans who are good on climate, and those voices are powerful voices, and we're trying to kind of harness those voices right now and say, look, it's not just Trump can be all alone on this. Trump can say that this is all a lie, that climate change is a hoax. But if we get members of his own party to defy him on that front, and there are some that are willing to do it, I think that's a pretty good counterpunch. And there's other voices too. There's other respected voices, not just Hollywood actors, but there's other people that we're thinking about talking to show how wrong Trump is on all of this.
Yeah, it's amazing times. I mean, talking about years of living dangerously, we may have even amped up that dangerous metric a little bit here since Inauguration Day.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, no, Joel, absolutely.
I'd like to take a break for our sponsors at this moment, and then when we come back, I'd love to ask you the question as a producer, what goes into a good story? When do you know you have a good story, and what might that story structure look like that the rest of us outside of the TV realm might be able to use in our presentations, in our white papers, in our blogging, in our communication channels when we are trying to, insert some influence and get people to move in a particular direction. So I'd love to cover that with you right after these messages.
Perfect.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing here on Business of Story, then you are going to love Definitive, the email from Convince and Convert that many marketers say is the most useful resource around. Each day, the team at Convince and Convert picks a topic and sends you the 3 best resources ever created about that topic. It's topical, it's timely, it's useful, so go to definitivedigest.com and subscribe for free right now. Hey, I've got a question for you. What's the best call to action button color on your website? Yeah, you probably didn't see that one coming, did you? Well, what's the best shape and sizes of your CTA buttons? And what copy gets more clicks? These questions have interrupted my sleep patterns for weeks now, until I downloaded a helpful new email marketing guide from Emma called Why We Click: The Psychology Behind a Great Call to Action. You'll learn how applying just a little bit of brain science can transform your CTA buttons into small but mighty conversion powerhouses. It covers the button color, copy, and placement that helps skyrocket click rates. Check it out at myemma.com/click. Emma helps marketers everywhere send smart, stylish email newsletters, promotions, and automated campaigns, and help us all rest a little easier knowing our email marketing is doing its job. So check out their new publication at myemma.com/click. You, like all business leaders and communicators, have an important brand story to tell, but it's probably not being heard. There's just too much competition for our attention, unless, of course, you tell a better story. For over a year now, I have connected you with more than 50 international story artists through this podcast to help you craft your ideal brand story for the growth of your enterprise and your people. Did you know I'm also available to you for speaking engagements, brand and leadership story workshops, even for one-on-one Skype or telephone brand story strategy consults? Plus, you can begin clarifying your brand story right now by downloading the interactive DIY workbook at businessofstory.com. You see, your sales don't have to be comedies or tragedies. You can make them epic by clarifying your brand story and connecting with audiences and customers like never before. So download your workbook today at businessofstory.com. And if you're not 100% satisfied, I'll happily refund your money. And one last thought. Just remember, the most potent story you ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a good one, my friends. Story on. Welcome back to Business of Story, and our guest today, Joel Bach, the creative and executive producer of Years of Living Dangerously on Nat Geo. Joel, man, it's just been such an interesting and timely show today. You, like all of us, have our backs up against the wall when we are trying to cut through the cacophony of communication that we all have to compete in out there. And especially in the world of sustainability and trying to share stories on climate change when it can be an extraordinarily divisive subject, as well as one is kind of a defeatist subject because so many people just feel like there's not a damn thing I can do about it. So coming back to the storyteller in you, you cut your teeth at 60 Minutes, arguably one of the top storytelling programs since it launched, I don't know how many decades ago, and then have moved into working first at Showtime and then moving over to Nat Geo. So Joel, what goes into telling a really good, compelling story that does cut through the clutter out there?
That's a question that's a wonderful question. So one thing we learned at 60 Minutes, and this is actually a story that my partner David Galber tells all the time, that Don Hewitt, who founded 60 Minutes, David went to Don Hewitt at one point and he said, Don, I want to do a story about acid rain. And Don said to David, we don't do stories about acid rain. We do stories about people who do something about acid rain. So, that's what I mean by that, and what Don meant by that is a great story always has to have a great character or great characters. And, to do a story on an issue where you just kind of interview a bunch of people and have them opine about whatever whatever they feel about that issue doesn't make for a good story. What makes for a good story is a compelling, riveting character who is trying to do something, right? So in season one, a great example of that is the story we did about this young woman in Ashland, North Carolina, named Anna Jane Joyner, and she's continues to this day to be a young climate activist. Her dad, Rick Joyner, is a highly conservative megachurch preacher who doesn't believe in climate change, and the story was Anna Jane's mission to try to convince her dad that climate change is real. So you've got these two great characters. Anna Jane's just a wonderful person and magnetic on TV, and her dad is a megachurch preacher, right? So he's a good character as well. And so you have these two good characters, but then you have this other ingredient, which is an uncertain outcome. You don't know what's going to happen, right? You don't. It's like, is she actually going to be able to pull this off and convince her dad, who doesn't buy this at all, to accept climate change? And what Anna Jane does is she takes her dad on kind of a whirlwind tour, and introduces him to people that he would normally talk to. I mean, so he talks to an evangelical climate scientist, this woman Catherine Hayhoe from Texas, and they go down to Florida, where the dad grew up, and they see that the fishing industry is being impacted by climate change, and so you wonder, is this going to have an impact on the dad? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't work. And then he meets the daughter, introduces her dad to a conservative congressman from a nearby district, someone who didn't believe in climate change and who now does. And you wonder, is that going to work? Is this going to finally make it so that the dad accepts climate change? And it doesn't work. In fact, he gets kind of more entrenched. But by the end of the story, there's Anna Jane, the daughter, brings her dad up to Boston to meet a scientist who used to be a climate change denier, and had been funded by the Koch brothers to basically disprove climate change. But in the course of his research, found that, or came to understand, that climate change is very much real. So he used Koch brother money to essentially prove climate change is real. And that did have an impact on the dad. So sitting down with this guy started to have a real impact. But by the end, he really hadn't moved on this position. So, in terms of a story where you have a kind of a happy ending, it didn't work out that way for us. But it still is a compelling story. You watch because you want to know what's going to happen. A similar story that we did for season one.
Real quick on that point, Joel, a couple of things. Hold that next story for me. I love the stories. So a couple of things in that. When you started following Anna Jane with her dad, you obviously didn't know what the outcome of this story was. So you sent your documentary crews just to go and basically listen in and capture this as they go along. And so at the end of it, when you realize you haven't really changed him, but in the telling of that story, your audiences listening along, are getting the same information. So you may be changing the hearts and minds of your audiences, even though one of your primary characters didn't move. It didn't take him to move to still have the impact you're looking for.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So you get a compelling narrative that has an impact on the audience, whether the characters within it do what you hope or expect them to do. But and actually at the end of that story, the dad invites Anna Jane to stand up in front of his congregation and give a speech about climate change. So even though he didn't come around on the issue, he did give her the opportunity to address his own following and tell them what she thinks. So there was
the stage in his world. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was, I guess, a bit of a happy ending at the end of the day on that one.
I'm sorry, but the next story.
Yeah, so the next story was, this is also from season one. I mean, there's other great stories from season two as well. But at the time, the congressman in Staten Island was a guy named Michael Grimm, and he was a Tea Party climate denier. So, but when Sandy hit, when Sandy hit the New York, New Jersey area, it hit Staten Island harder almost than anywhere else. Well, in some parts of New Jersey were hit harder, but for New York, Staten Island was really in the line of the storm. And Grimm, that was his district, so here's this guy who doesn't believe in climate change, but over the course of the year that followed Sandy, he spent a great deal of his time having to rebuild the community and find funds, federal funds, to rebuild the community. And he through the course of our storytelling with him, he started to, consider the science, and he talked to other Republicans who cared about climate change, who had come around on climate change. And it's a similar kind of story. It's like, the question is, will this guy finally accept that this is real? And in this case, there was a great outcome. He did. He made a full 180 and reported to Chris Hayes, who was the correspondent, Chris Hayes of MSNBC. They sat down at the end of the story in a diner in Staten Island, and Grimm said, I get it now. I did believe it, but having had climate change come to my front door, and now having taken a look at the science, I accept it. And again, it's a story where there's an uncertain outcome, and Grimm is a great character. He's fantastic TV, and you have some drama, and you wonder what's going to happen, and it could have gone either way. But in this case, it went in our minds the right way. So those are, to me, those are the kind of some of the more powerful aspects that you should look for in a good story.
Yeah, and in both cases, and especially with Grimm, he had to experience it firsthand to change his ideology. So the ideology, much like the pastor, the preacher, I'm sure his ideology was based on, his belief that there's God up there in the heavens and he's controlling everything, and how could we possibly have an impact on our environment that we live here. But Grimm had to live through it and literally slog through the flood and then find the funding to do it. I suppose it comes down to telling that story. You've got to get your audiences, and this is for all the listeners, you have to have your audiences live vicariously through the characters in your stories. They may not be preachers, they may not be preacher daughters, but they have to have an empathy and an appreciation for what they're going through in order for you as the storyteller to connect with that audience and get them to feel it, get them to experience what Grimm was experiencing as he was slogging through all that, if you're going to have any hopes for changing. Now, that's a little bit of my soapbox, but I'm wondering, is that what you see too in your work, and especially in your documentary work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way you put it, that the audience lives vicariously through our characters and through our cast members is exactly right. We had in season 2, we had Jack Black go to Miami because he had heard that Miami was vulnerable, and a lot of people know that Miami is vulnerable when it comes to sea level rise.
By the way, Jack Black makes a lot of money. Can't he dress up a little bit more for these shows? I love his persona, but he looks like my drinking buddy from Wazoo out there.
We said, Jack, bring 5 days of wardrobe because we're going to be shooting for a bunch of days. We need you to have 5 different outfits. And so he brought 5 T-shirts with huge animal prints on them. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, it was good stuff.
Yeah, right. It was good stuff. So, Jack shows up and again, like, he doesn't know much about climate change. He knows very little about it. But the first scene we shot with him was he sits down with these scientists and they present him this slideshow that shows what's coming. And it's really terrifying. And then he goes out to see if anyone's doing anything about it. So, it's his journey. Like, how could something so horrible be coming to Miami, and yet that seems like the city's not doing anything to prepare for it? Well, he finds the mayor of Miami Beach is trying to do something about it. But he then learns that so many people aren't, because, one, the governor doesn't care about it. Marco Rubio, the senator, doesn't care about it, or doesn't believe in it, or is a climate denier and says it's all a hoax. And then there's such a construction boom there that no one wants to think about it because that's bad for business, right? And you've got developers who are putting up, and at the time we were filming, there were permits for 200 high rises to go up, and none of whom, or very few of whom, would take into account climate change. So these are just regular high rises, and so we thought, like, what's the kind of narrative here? And it became clear to us and to Jack, that the narrative is, you have kind of a crazy situation, and it started to make Jack feel crazy. He's like, how could this city continue on as if nothing's going on. In fact, build even more. And so, the narrative device was that Jack starts to get crazy. So he has a therapy session on the beach to try to understand.
I saw that. Yeah, that kind of came out of left field, and I go, whoa, they're pushing it here.
Yeah, but that's something that we never would have done at 60 Minutes. But to me, it's my favorite scene in that story, and one of my favorite scenes in all of season 2, and because it's just so weird. But Jack he was feeling crazy about this experience, and we brought in a real therapist. It's actually a climate therapist, and they have a therapy session on the beach. And he tried to he took it very seriously, and he actually tried to have a therapeutic session where we didn't have time in the story to do this, but he actually meditates. He's quiet for like a couple minutes. His eyes are closed, and he's just deep in thought and deep in a meditative state, trying to make sense of it all. And our cameras are rolling, and for a couple minutes, he's not doing anything. I wish we had had time to put that on TV, because it's just incredibly funny and poignant too. But so it's those kind of things, like really just stepping back and thinking, what is it in this story that we need to convey? And and to me, that scene kind of wrapped it all up in a nice way.
It did, and then at one point in there, he's talking to the mayor of Miami, I believe, and the mayor is talking, and they're showing areas that they've already raised up the city, and said that one of the things might be that they would have to raise the entire city, which now seems like it really borders on that realm of science fiction. And when do you start running the risk of losing your audience? Like, they're like, okay, you got me to this point, but come on, how could you possibly raise an entire city? Is there ever a concern of that?
Well, I think it's crazy. I think you think it's crazy. But there are people in Miami who didn't feel it's crazy. In fact, they are trying to raise the city, right? So you've actually got the mayor of Miami Beach who takes climate change seriously, and he's thinking, what can I do? And the only thing he can do, or the only thing that he can think to do, is to try to raise the city. There's enough. There are enough tax dollars in Miami Beach to raise parts of it, and so he's with some success he's addressing the problem. What we report in that story is that you can't build seawalls because there's a porous limestone underneath Miami, and so the water comes in from below. So there's only so many things you can do to save Miami, and it seems crazy to lift the whole city. So, but then again, the mayor of Miami Beach can't afford to think about all of Miami. He's just thinking about the beach, right? Yeah. The beach area, and he's doing what he can. It seems preposterous to me too, and yet he's trying. And meanwhile, the rest of the city is doing nothing. So yeah, it's ludicrous, but at the same time, it's what's going on.
So if you were to break that down, at least in my mind, using Randy Olson's and button, therefore, the very simple narrative structure is, you've got climate change, proven climate change, and you are actually seeing its symptoms as sewers back up from high tide into the communities around Miami. But Miami elite and bureaucrats are simply ignoring it. There's the conflict, and therefore, what is the solution? It's story. I guess it's just bringing as many of these kinds of stories to the forefront and let your audiences judge for themselves. Does this make sense, or is this absolute lunacy that we need to start taking action on now?
That's really well put, by the way. I think the reality is that we're going to lose some places like Miami. We basically reported that Miami is gone. It's going to take some time, but there's very little that can be done to save it.
Well, like in the next 70 years, you showed that map, and the red where the water is inundating it is pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So obviously the last thing I would ever want is to have Miami disappear into the sea, but it may take that to wake this country up and to make it the number one priority. If we actually start to lose places like Miami, I hope that we have the wherewithal to take action. The problem is, Miami won't be inundated with water until the end of the century. It'll start to be inundated mid-century, but it's not really going to be in serious trouble until the end of the century. And by then, that's another 80 years of climate change upon us, and that's also just one problem. So
Yeah.
it's tough. I mean, the other big goal and mission that we have is to show that climate change is upon us now. And I mean, yes, the biggest impacts will hit us in the future, but the goal for us is to show that it's happening already, and that it's not just icebergs melting in the Arctic, and it's not just polar bears who are going to be screwed. It's happening here in America right now, and it's affecting people. And so that was the kind of mission. That was the mission for season 1. For season 2, it remains the mission, but we're now adding this new element, which is that we're in a race against time. So the bad news is getting worse. So the impacts of climate change are exceeding what climate scientists expected even 5, 10, 15 years ago. It's worse than they imagined, or their worst case scenarios are coming to bear. At the same time, the good news is getting better. So people are addressing the issue. Governments are addressing the issue. Companies are dealing with it. Communities. There's a lot of good news, and there are a lot of solutions in play, and the technologies to bring us into a clean energy world are also much more available to us. So, so you've got the good news getting better and the bad news getting worse, and the reality is one of these is gonna beat out the other, right? And it's our goal to make sure that the good news beats out the bad news in time.
Yeah. Well, more power to you. Let's wrap the show with my final question for you, Joel. And this is for all the storytellers, communicators out there, people that, gotta get their point across. Can you give us 1, 2, or 3 insights that we need to be doing a better job, or that we can use to strengthen our communication storytelling muscles? I think, again, if the goal is to ratchet this up, for us at least, if the goal is to ratchet climate change up the priority list, the thing that people can do is they can share the stories that are out there. Tell others to check out the stories that we've done, or stories that they've read, in the paper, or other stories they've heard, and just really use, especially social media, I guess, as the tool to share what you're hearing with as many people as possible. And because those stories are out there, we're trying to tell the story of climate change every single day on Facebook and Twitter and our other social channels, mainly on Facebook right now. And that story needs to be shared over and over and over again until it becomes the story that everyone's paying attention to. It's going to be tough, as you said at the beginning, at the start of this conversation. We talked about all the other issues that are kind of dominating the headlines. But if enough people talk about climate change or whatever story they believe in, it can break through. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, too, what I see with our sustainability students and others when they're working as an expert in an area like climate change, whatever, they get caught up on the facts and stats. And as Don Hewitt told your executive producer, co-producer there, it's not about the facts and the stats. It's about the people and the impact it has on the people. And I think that gets lost on business communicators. For whatever reason, they tend to throw the person out of the equation when they come to tell their stories. And I think you made a really good point. I just wanted to underscore that.
That's something that I'll just say one more thing on that. We did an impact review. We had an impact review done on season 1, and we're going to do the same thing with season 2. And we found that we got a score of a 96 out of 100 in terms of emotional impact for our storytelling. So, and if you want people to get engaged, and you want people to act, or you want people to do something, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. Again, that's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama. And we feel that to the extent that we were able to, in a documentary format, we feel we were able to do that with climate change. And that's something that anytime you're trying to tell a story, I think those are the essential ingredients if you want people to care and walk away and remember what you did. I mean, you can throw a zillion facts at someone and it's likely they won't remember too many of them. If you tell them a compelling story, that'll stick to their ribs.
Great characters, uncertain outcomes, and high stakes and drama. Love it. Love it. Well, Joel, thank you so much for being here on Business of Story. It's just really been a fascinating show for me today, and I'm sure our listeners love it as well.
Thank you so much. And I'll just say season 1 is on YouTube. All of season 1's on YouTube right now. And season 2 is on Nat Geo on demand, or you can watch it on iTunes, on Amazon, or Hulu. And then
on
obviously,
Hulu too, yeah.
And Hulu too. And if you want to basically be part of kind of the daily discussion and storytelling of climate, join us on Facebook, because that's where all of our attention is right now.
And on Facebook, is it the Years of Living Dangerously group? Is that what they search for?
You just type in Years of Living Dangerously and it'll come up.
Okay.
It's clear who we are. Follow us there and start. And we really interact with our fans and followers on Facebook. So if you have other questions, join us there and send me a question and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, and I can attest to that, folks. I read a really fascinating article about Joel. I don't even remember what publication it was in. It was just before Christmas, and I reached out to him blindly. He knew me from no one, and he got back to me, I think, within 5 days, agreeing to be on the show. So I really appreciate that, Joel, and I appreciate your access to your viewers and all you're doing in sustainable storytelling out there. Congratulations for the great show, Years of Living Dangerously.
Thanks, Park. It's been wonderful talking to you, and good luck with all the work you're doing as well.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening to this edition of Business of Story. Join us next week, next Monday, when we'll have another story artist like Joel on here to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. In the meantime, if I can be of service to you, please visit me over at businessofstory.com. As you know by now, I have a ton of tools, free tools for you to use as you start getting your brand story straight. And also join me on Facebook Live every Friday from here on out. 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. I spend about 20 minutes to a half hour on there sharing insights that I learned from this show and from my own work in brand storytelling with you. So join me over there on Facebook Live, 10 a.m. every Friday, Mountain Standard Time. And until next week, I hope you have the most wonderful life, and I will see you, or at least you will hear me then.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business of Story. Don't forget there are terrific free storytelling resources for you at thebusinessofstory.com, where you'll also find the complete show archive. The Business of Story is sponsored by Emma and by Convince and Convert, and is produced by Convince and Convert Media. Find more great shows like The Business of Story at marketingpodcasts.com, the first search engine for marketing podcasts. Podcast imaging by